Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you a lot. Much appreciated.
No worries. Okay. We'll provide the recording afterwards. I think it will save on our systems. So then you can share it with colleagues who couldn't come today or tonight. In the meantime, I started sharing my title slide. Can you see it? Is it working all right? Great.
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. Thank you. Then we're all set. Let's wait additional 2 minutes, and then we'll be starting. Okay, it's 05. I guess it's best time to start now. If anyone else wants to come later, I'll be admitting people throughout the presentation, so it's no problem. Great. In case everyone is ready, hi, good evening, rather. Thank you for joining at this very late stage of the day. My name is Shimon, and I will be giving you like an introductory story into what we'll be talking about today very soon. But before that, I wanted to make a very brief technical remark. The remark being, you can see a Slido code in front of you on the title slide. You can use it to enter the Slido session either through their app or by going to slido.com and entering the code there. Don't worry, it's nothing. I won't quiz you or test you tonight. I just wanted to provide you with the opportunity to ask anonymous questions. I opened Q&A there, so if there's anything rather sensitive or personal that you would like to have discussed in the Q&A session later on, but you're uncomfortable asking it, with leaving your full name and surname, you can go through Slido and you can ask the question there. It will be fully anonymous, and I have like a dedicated time towards the end of the presentation where we can discuss any sort of questions, so don't be afraid to ask. We talk about all sorts of topics in these sessions. It doesn't have to be related to any particular slide. With that being said, let's get into the introductory story. So what we'll be talking about today is sort of finance, right? Personal finance and personal financial health. And the way I like to think about personal finance is by comparing it to taking care of your physical health, right? Because both those things are about very, let's say, small habits or habits that might seem small and whose consequences you only see after many, many years of doing them. But they can be, similarly dangerous if you do them wrong for a very long time, right? So, for example, probably everyone here knows or heard at some point that if over the very long term you consume more calories than you are capable of burning, you will accumulate fat very likely, right? In most cases, if you do that. And if you do that over a very long period, then that can become limiting, right? It can be limiting. It can harm your self-esteem or your mental health. It can also become actually like dangerous when it comes to like some health risks or diagnoses of diseases and similar things. And in finance, it works very similarly. For example, when we started with the caloric analogy, if you spend more than you can earn over a very long period of time, you will accumulate debt. And similar to being overweight or having a lot of fat, excess debt can become limiting. It can harm your self-esteem. It can be challenging to your relationships. It can become actually dangerous when you come near some personal bankruptcy or get, laid off your job, lose income, and are unable to make monthly payments, right? So it's similar. It's about habits. It's about long-term habits. However, financial health or taking care of your financial situation has one very significant disadvantage compared to taking care of your physical health in Slovakia. And that's that it's not very much engraved in culture, right? When you think about physical health, there's a lot of information out there, and it's not such a shame to talk about it, right? We started admiring people who start going to the gym, who start eating healthier food, who try to lose weight or live in a healthier lifestyle. We embrace it and we sort of praise it, right? However, talking about financial problems, that's a different thing. People usually don't like to think about it. We don't like to admit to our friends that we're living paycheck to paycheck because we're ashamed of it. We don't want other people to know that we have financial problems or how much we earn because we are ashamed of it. And that's why we usually don't talk about these things, don't negotiate our salaries, don't exchange tips about finance, and don't admit that we have problems to each other. And that's sort of a pity because by talking about it more openly, we could exchange a lot of tips on how to do things better and how to, set it up in a way that works for you. So one of the things we as Finax do in the markets where we are present is we are trying to talk about these things openly, and we are trying to give people some toolkit, on first of all, some rules they can follow, but second of all, like the language they can use to sort of speak about this, ask for help, exchange tips, and sort of find a way that works for them with their personal financial situation. And so that will be the first step we'll be taking today, and I believe it gives you inspiration to be more open and to maybe put your personal financial situation into a better state as before. And if that happens, I will be super happy because that's the goal, really. Before I delve into the specific, content that I have prepared for you today, let me start by saying a couple of words about myself so that you understand where I take the audacity to teach you anything about these financial topics at all, right? So hi, my name is Shimon. I work in this Slovak company called Finax, which I will introduce very shortly. I have this terribly sounding job position, but what it generally means is that I manage a small team, which is mainly responsible for communication and product, right? So what we do in terms of communication, those are any activities related to sort of explaining and communicating our products, how you can use them, sort of what they are to public, right? And we do that through a variety of channels, starting with these webinars, right? And sort of lectures, you can say, to blogs, to media contributions, to podcast series, to writing a personal finance book that we can currently work on, right? So that's the communication part. What we also do, or what I also do, is product. So with us, since we are an investment company, an investment firm, product are the investment portfolios, are the investment products that you can invest in. I am a part of the investment committee, and that means that whenever we are making changes to our portfolios or creating new portfolios suitable for different financial goals, I am usually involved in the process and could, absorb some of that knowledge, and I will try to pass on some of that knowledge onto you in these webinars, right? And the last thing I'm usually involved with is corporate finance. That means budgeting and controlling whether the accounting for our company is okay and reporting that to shareholders. I also believe that to be partially relevant to the topics of today because, managing a personal or family budget is similar to managing a company budget. It's just on a smaller scale, but the principles are broadly similar. So yeah, that is who I am. Before that, I studied abroad. I studied in Amsterdam. I spent one semester in Hong Kong on an exchange, and I mostly focused on economics and finance, which were my two majors when I was studying. So really, like finance, economics, and stuff like that. It's a long-term hobby of mine, and I hope I will be able to share a lot of interesting experience and knowledge with you today. I also promised that I will explain what our company does, or sort of introduce the company very briefly. It's not a promo, but I promise that it will be important to understand why we do the educational part, right? So I'm from this company called Finax. We are a Slovak, but now we operate across most of Central Europe. A broker dealer, that means an investment company. So the main thing that puts food on our tables is providing investment portfolios suitable for various financial goals to people. People usually come to our website, fill in a simple questionnaire saying, what they want to do with their money. So what is their goal, how long they want to invest for, how much they want to save up or similar things, how experienced they are with investing, what is their attitude to risk. And we then recommend a suitable product for their needs, right? We have a variety of products, from products that serve sort of like savings accounts, just, with very little risk for just, earning some interest on money that you will need within a couple of months or maybe a year or two, to very long-term products that are supposed to prepare you for your retirement, so pension saving, or supposed to secure the future and education for your kids, or similar things, right? We also have this very novel product, which is called the Pan-European Personal Pension Product. That's very interesting because it was created by the European Union and is something like a Europe-wide third pillar functioning under stricter regulations when it comes to fees or potential returns, inflation beating and similar things. And, in one of the webinars that we have within this educational series, we also talk about pensions and about third pillar a lot. So we believe that this is a very innovative product that can improve third pillar and bring like advantages compared to existing third pillar schemes. Besides that, so products are not that important. But what we also do when it comes to advancing those products is a lot of financial education, right? So as I already mentioned, we've existed for 7 years, and throughout those 7 years, we've created hundreds of blogs, various podcasts, media contributions, organized events where people could ask questions, did a lot about, just like financial education and financial topics. We also published a textbook for second grade of primary school kids. So a lot of activities. The reason that we do this is, first of all, because it's our hobby. We love talking about these topics and we love educating people about that. And it's always a very good feeling when someone, tells us, oh, I changed something about my situation and now I have more financial security in my life because I have some reserve for unexpected expenses or something like that. But it's also, very sensible from the business perspectives, because we don't think that the job of investment companies should finish with throwing a portfolio at people and like expecting them to teach how to handle it wisely. Investment products can be handled wisely and can be handled in a very risky way that can end up hurting you, right? So it's very important in our view to educate clients on how to handle investment products, what they can expect, what they can't expect, and how to behave in a way that makes those investment products safe and beneficial for them to the biggest extent. So we did a lot of educational content, and after some years we felt some need to like put it together, to put all the ideas into some structured educational program, and that's where the program Finax Financial Wellness was born, and that's what you are currently watching right within this webinar. So Finax Financial Wellness, it's a series of 5 webinars which cover various topics where we sort of aggregated all the things that we talked about over the many years. Right now, you are watching the first topic in the series, right? So that is centered around some healthy personal finance basics and building up an emergency fund as the first savings goal you should have in your life. So that is topic number 1. We have 4 additional topics that we won't be discussing today, but they can we can come. I can come back and talk about them at later points. And these are the following. The second topic talks about investing specifically, right? So it explains, what are stocks, what are bonds, what you can invest in, and how to invest in a wise way, right? What we think is the good investment philosophy for ordinary investors. The third topic is specifically about pension, right? So it talks about pension systems, second, third pillar schemes, and sort of how to prepare for retirement so that you can retire decently and don't have to, experience financial stress when you are old. The fourth topic is about debt. So it's about which debt is good and a constructive tool, which debt is dangerous and should be avoided, how to distinguish between the two, how to sort of avoid having problems with debt in your life. The fifth topic, very popular, is about finances for kids specifically. So first of all, how to educate kids about money, and second of all, how to save some money for kids if you want to help them with starting their life. This last one was added very recently. We just had the first presentation a couple of weeks ago, so we're still gathering feedback for it. But young parents are enjoying it a lot. But without further ado, let's not, get too consumed up with the structure of the program, and let's get into the healthy basics part, right? So before getting into any, sort of guidelines or advice, in this first topic, I wanted to answer, the big why question. Why should I even care about personal finance? Because I don't think that's intuitive. Many people think, personal finance is something for people who understand math and it's complicated and it's boring. And I understand that emotion. But I think that, taking care of your personal finance is something everyone should be interested in. So why is that the case? I'll give you a couple of reasons. The first reason I think can be depicted in this crazy picture, but give me some time to explain it. What this picture shows is the white line is your ability to generate income. And you can see that it declines over time. I think that's intuitive. Probably everyone wants to retire at some point. No one wants to be working when they are 70 or 75. And you won't be able to much, right? Like your energy levels decline, your cognitive capacities decline, and everyone just wants to chill when you are older, right? So very likely in your life, income is temporary. You will stop getting a salary at some point, right? And sort of what you can do, or what is the goal of saving, investing, and personal finance, is to be able to sort of, when you are working, when you can generate income, when you can have some savings, to sort of build up some financial wealth, just build up some wealth, build up some savings that will take care of you when you cannot take care of yourself anymore, right? And maybe many of you are now asking the logical question of, won't the state take care of us when we are old, right? Like, aren't there pensions? Isn't there a retirement system? Won't this sort of provide decent life when we are old and can't work anymore? And that is the case now, partially, but it very likely isn't something that especially younger generations can rely on anymore. And that is because pension systems, as they are designed now, are super unsustainable. The reason is that the way our pension systems work is by imagine this. You have a group of people who are currently working, and you tax their work, right? So they are forced to pay some social security contributions, and by that you raise an amount of money. And that amount of money is immediately distributed to people who are currently retired, right? So people who are working are sort of paying money to finance pensions of people who are currently retired. You can think about it as a pipeline, through which money is flowing from people who are working to people who are retired. Now, the problem is that Europe and Central European countries, but the entire continent is getting much, much older. So people are living longer because we have better healthcare, we have better medical inventions. So people are living longer, they are spending more years in retirement, and fewer kids than before are being born, right? Fertility rates have declined. So people are having fewer kids than before, and they are living longer. So this means a problem, because the number of people who are retired and need to be paid is increasing, and the amount of people who you can tax who are working is declining, because the kids are not replacing the people who are retiring. And that means that you have less and less money from the working people, and a need to pay more and more money to people who are currently retired, right? And that means a problem, because you'll run out of money at some point, and you won't have enough to pay high pensions to everyone. So that is why it is expected that the states in the future just won't have enough money to take care of everyone. And it's already a problem, for example, in countries like Slovakia. So our pension system is making a loss, right? I think it was almost 3 billion last year that had to be paid from from some other kinds of taxes, not from those social security payments that were used for retirement, right? So already we don't have money for the pensions we are paying. Imagine the problem in 30 or 40 years where there will be many more retirees and fewer people working, right? So that is why it's expected that pensions won't be very high in the future, especially the state ones. What you can see in the graph in front of you are expected so-called replacement rates. Replacement rates are numbers or percentages that tell us the portion of our income that we were used to before we retired that we will get after retiring, right? So let's say you were used to earning around 1,000 euros over your life and you have a replacement rate of 50%. That means you will be getting 500 euros, so half of your previous income, 50% of your previous income in retirement. And for most Central European countries and Eastern European countries, these replacement rates you can see are expected to be in the year 2070. So in the future, when people who are currently younger will be retired, will be between, let's say, 25 to 50%. So that's a pretty low number, right? I can imagine limiting my expenses somewhat when I am old, but cutting your expenses by half or even more, so that you can survive when you are old, that sounds like a bit of a stretch for most people, right? So it's good to not rely solely on the state, especially if you don't want to have a part-time job when you are old and retired because you will need more money, or if you want some more decent standard of living, so be able to travel, take your grandkids to trips and stuff like that. You probably need to think about your pension in advance and build some of your own savings that can provide you with some supportive income in retirement. So that's another reason to care about personal finance, and investing, saving, all of that is about transferring some money into the future to take care of you when you are retired. So that was one of the reasons, right? Retirement. Another reason is that here, especially again in the region in Central Europe, we don't have a big tradition of taking care of our wealth, right? Even if we and that's essentially what's depicted in the graph. You don't have to study it too deeply. What this graph says is that even if we manage to build up some savings in these countries in Central Europe, we usually hold most of it in the bank, right? So we hold it as cash, we hold it as deposit somewhere, essentially most of our savings. But if you start talking to someone who develops financial theory or is experienced with investing, they will tell you that's usually not a good strategy, for the simple reason that banks usually don't pay much interest, right? I have one very big Slovak bank, and they're still not paying me anything on my savings account, right? Despite interest rates being high. Anyone who has a mortgage knows that that interest rates are high. Yet savings accounts and stuff like that usually doesn't pay much on interest. At the same time, it's true that prices are rising, right? We noticed that over the past couple of years because they rose really fast, but it's true over the long run, right? Prices are gradually rising. This is called inflation, which means that the same amount of money will be able to buy sort of less or fewer goods and services in the future, so it will be less valuable. So money you keep in the bank, which doesn't earn much interest, only loses value to inflation, right? So that's not very good, because if you build up some savings, you worked hard for it. They are, fruits of your hard labor. It's a pity to let it rot in the bank due to the power of inflation, right? And what countries with sort of a bigger tradition of finance or of investing do is they invest a greater portion of their wealth. They keep maybe some emergency fund to cover unexpected expenses in the bank, and any savings on top of that, they invest it to sort of earn some investment return on it and beat inflation, right? Sort of the goal is to preserve or even enhance the value of the savings you worked so hard to get. And that also means that you can build your wealth faster and get all the benefits that come from having some money to spare with it. So that's also shown here. Like, the world of investing is very wide. There are many things you can invest in, like stocks, maybe your own housing, right? Bonds, and also like cash in the bank or some savings accounts, right? And the thing about investing is that different investments are suitable for different goals, right? Stocks are maybe suitable for retirement because that will come in a very distant future, and bonds or cash in the bank can be suitable for other goals, such as having an emergency fund to cover unexpected expenses. So it's not that any of these investments is bad per se, right? They are just suitable for different goals. The problem is that here in Slovakia, we don't have a big tradition with investing. We don't have a lot of information about finance being accessible in an understandable way or shared, which means that we often limit ourselves to cash or maybe to some bond funds, right? But we don't explore other investments such as stocks, yeah, and maybe also real estate because most Slovaks own their own housing, right? But things like stocks or some alternative investments usually remain untouched, and that is a pity because for some goals such as retirement, these are great investments and very suitable, and that is why it's sort of worth it to take interest in personal finance and also explore the broader scope of the world of investing so that you can always use the most suitable instrument for any goal you might have, right? And that was sort of reason number two. And last reason, I think that one will be the most intuitive. I don't have a separate slide for it, but one of the reasons I also wanted to mention as part of why I care about personal finance is that having wealth, having money, it's really liberating, right? And I would say due to two reasons. One is that if you have money, then you have less stress in your life, right? So just imagine having some savings to cover unexpected situations, such as, that can range from a car breaks down or your washing machine breaks down, right? Or you lose your job and you are unable to find a new one for a couple of months. All those situations are stressful, and they can be less stressful if you are financially prepared for them, right? And that's a big thing because, for example, money is one of the top reasons in many countries why relationships fall apart, why marriages end up in divorces, right? So it's sort of good to have less financial stress in your life. But also, once you don't have financial stress, having a lot of money is still liberating, right? You have more freedom if you have money. That can range from, the freedom to take a break from working if you are feeling burnt out, or the freedom to walk away from your job and stay, living on your own money for a couple of months looking for a better job. All of those things are easier to do if you have some reserves to sort of feed your family and you don't endanger your kids by taking a break or by leaving your job and looking for a better one that will be more suitable for you. So it allows you to be freer and happier, to be fair. But also, the more money you have, the more freedom you get. I have a colleague who wanted to, they sort of agreed with the partner that one of them will switch to a part-time job to spend more time with the kids and with family, and they, taking care of the household, because they didn't want to work anymore, right? And because they had a lot of money to do that, they could, because they had a lot of money, because they had a lot of wealth, they could afford to sort of get reduced income from that point and spend more time doing, hobbies or taking care of family. So there are various stages of it, but you can probably agree that having more money means less stress and usually more freedom to do things that you like, to do things that make you happy. And that is why, having financial situation in order is a great thing. Okay, enough about this why question. I hope that sort of convinced you that this is a topic that anyone can take care of, right? And that is really important to take care of. Let's now ask ourselves what we can do about it. So let's assume you are convinced now. What is the first step you can take when you want to, let's say you never took much interest in your personal finance. What is the first step you can do to sort of start getting it in better shape? So the first step I'll talk about is some sort of financial analysis. I like calling it, like a financial doctor's checkup, like with your health. If you don't ever go to doctor's checkups, they can't tell you what you are doing wrong and where potential risks are for the future, right? And it's the same with finance. You have to look into the mirror to know where you can improve. And that can be done in 4 steps, right? So the first thing you can do to sort of become more aware of your financial situation is to become aware of your income. This is probably not hard. I think most people are already aware of it, right? So it's just like the sum of any income you can count on over the month. That can be, of course, salary, but for many people, those can be maybe some tax bonuses or some scholarships, rental income, any other sort of allowance. Just like the total money that you can count on in a given month or a given year. Now, the reason this is important is that this should be a ceiling on your expenses plus savings, right? If you spend more than you earn regularly, then sooner or later you will start accumulating debt. And that can become dangerous and limiting if you do that over the long time, right? So it's important to know that this is the upper limit, the ceiling. Okay, now the less fun parts, right? So another thing you can sort of briefly evaluate is the wealth that you managed to build from your income. So that's just like savings in bank accounts and any investments, second pillar savings, third pillar savings, the approximate value of your house if you own your own real estate, right? And similar things. Don't spend too much time on this. It's not important to know it to exact euros or something like that. It's just an approximation. Now, this can already be an initial red flag, right? So I would say being aware of how much wealth you have is important for two things. One, because, accumulating some wealth, creating more savings or more money is what allows you to access those benefits that I was talking about. The more money you have, the less stress you have, the more prepared you are for dangerous, unexpected situations like job loss, and the more freedom you have to spend your time as you wish, right? And do things that you really love instead of just like, doing them for survival. So having more wealth is important. It's one of the goals of personal finance. The second reason this is important is that it can already give you some initial red flags, right? So, for example, if your income has been relatively okay or high over your life, but you haven't managed to build up much savings, which is the case for many people who earn a lot of money, they just are unable to save despite having above average income, that it can be an initial red flag that probably there's something that could be done better. There's something to improve about the way you handle your money. Okay, now to the funniest part, which is always the least pleasant from these four things, and that's becoming aware of your expenses, right? So what I mean by this is to open your bank account or your bank app and watch or sort of track your spending for the last, let's say, 3 to 4 months. What you should be looking for is to categorize your expenses into various categories, right? So to try to find out how much you spend on transport, on housing, on food, and you can split food into like some groceries and restaurants or eating out, hobbies, fun, kids and family, health, and similar categories, right? You can like create these little brackets and track how much you spent on them in the last, let's say, 3 to 4 months, right? And or how much you spend on them in a typical month, essentially, right? Um, Here, this will be unpleasant for many people because many times we are ashamed for how we spend. I remember that feeling many times when I woke up after a night out and I didn't even want to look into my account. But hey, if you don't examine how you spend, you can't learn whether there is a way to, improve your spending habits, right? So maybe after you do this exercise, you will find out that on some categories you are spending much more than you yourself find, valuable. You will be like, oh, this is too high. I'm not getting enough happiness for this money. So I'll just try to be more careful about this specific spending category in the future, right? And you can't learn if there are something, if there are surprises like that unless you do this exercise. So you can go over it and you can find out whether you are spending on things that actually make you happy, right? And then the last thing is to be aware of your debt, right? So sum up any outstanding principal amounts on your loans. That can be a mortgage, consumer loan, unpaid credit card, and similar things. The reason I'm also mentioning this is that over the long term, so over many, many years, you should be seeking to sort of pay off your debt. So for the value of your debt to be declining and the value of your wealth, right? So savings and all of that should be increasing, right? If it's the other way around, so savings are staying very low and that the value of that is increasing, then it's probably a signal that you are spending more than you can earn and that there will be problems in the future unless you change something about the way you live, right? Okay, so this is looking into the past. It's looking into the mirror, but we can't change this, right? So a good question now is, okay, I did this. What can I do in the future? How can we improve? So a good second step after doing your financial analysis is to set up a budget, right? So a budget is just the plan of how much you want to spend per month on each category of expenses, right? So you will set up some target amounts for groceries, for restaurants, for transport, for housing, for fun and going out and similar things, right? And you will try to stick to that budget, right? So you will try to spend not more than the amount that you you have designated for that category. Now there is some theory behind how a healthy budget should look like the optimal proportions you should get to. I will explain those, and then I'll explain how to get there, right? If it sounds challenging at first. So usually, people who did this with a lot of people, financial advisors, let's say that a budget should look something like this. 50 to 60% of that budget will cover the needs, right? So that's anything you need to pay for to survive, right? So that's housing, it's utilities, loan repayments, phone bills, internet, and some basic groceries and clothing. I don't mean restaurants or deliveries. I mean like basic groceries that you need to cook at home, for example. And also with clothing, it's not expensive fashion. It's just like what you need to, not freeze or not walk around naked. But it's not like supposed to be, some higher standard necessarily. Now, 30% of the budget could be allocated towards wants, right? So those are things that we don't need to survive. Like if there was an apocalypse, we could, survive without them. But we usually want to spend on them because they give more fun and more meaning to our life. So it's good to have them in your budget, right? That can be traveling and vacations for some people. It can be eating out in restaurants for many people. Maybe some more expensive fashion, fun, hobbies, and stuff like that, right? So though that goes towards the wants part, right? And then usually what financial theory recommends is to save at least 10 to 20% of your income, right? So to allocate 10 to 20% of the budget towards savings and investments. That's an amount that you set aside to sort of save up for financial goals. So those financial goals can at first be, for example, an emergency fund, so creating savings to cover unexpected situations. And later on, it can be retirement investments, maybe some investments for your kids, stuff like that. So within 10 to 20%. So it's good to try to get your savings to at least 10% at first, right? And maybe then increase it over time if your income grows or something like that. Now, what you might be thinking is, okay, that's all very nice theory, but we can't get there, right? Our expenses are too high, our incomes are too low. It's very difficult to save 10 to 20% in the current environment. And I get that. If that's the case, then we need to look for an inspiration to sort of start spending less. That's the first, good first step to find out whether we can survive and be, let's say, comparatively happy with saving less money. How to do that? So, yeah. So when you try to save, I would say that the best part is to start from the so-called big three. Big three are the most important expenses in terms of how large they are. So most people spend most of their money on these three things. And those are housing, food, and transportation, right? Usually when you pay for these three things, most of your money is gone, right? So the reason it's good to start from these is that they might seem unavoidable, right? You are like, those are fixed costs. I need them. Yes, but maybe because they are so expensive. Sometimes one meaningful sacrifice in these three areas can mean that you save so much money that you essentially don't need to limit yourself anywhere else. It will just free up enough money to start saving 10 to 20% of your income, right? And I think it's also a good psychologically because many people sort of don't want to talk to financial advisors or don't like personal finance because they think, being responsible with money means never spending on coffee or something like that. So not enjoying our lives, not feeling joy. And that's not true, right? You should start optimizing from those things that we have to pay for and that are expensive, that can sort of create meaningful savings if you do one meaningful sacrifice. So how to do that, right? I'll share some tips that we could think of when we were creating this presentation. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list. There are many other good tips that will work for different people. We all have our unique situations. So I suggest, like, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, communicate about this. Like, ask around, ask people who maybe can save, how they did that, how they managed to save money. Go online, ask people on blogs, or read blogs that are out there online. Read personal finance books. Ask ChatGPT. I don't know. There are many other good tips out there. These are just some for inspiration, right? So the first major thing you can save on is housing, right? With many people who have a mortgage, always the price of housing is related to how large that is. So maybe for some people, could you do with a smaller flat, a smaller piece of real estate, or maybe with a flat that is not so conveniently located, right? For many people, buying large housing is just the matter of wanting to show off, or just like being used to, okay, I need to live in a house because that's expected of me or something like that. But when they do a bit of thinking, they realize that living in something smaller would not limit their life happiness that much, because they don't necessarily need a large house with a garden to feel happiness in their life. Many other people do, but for many people, they can just do better. And that can allow them to have a much lower mortgage repayment per month, and that can already free up 100 200 euros, and that's very meaningful for many people to start saving, right? So maybe choosing a better housing can be a thing. For other people, this is not accessible for everyone, but if you can work online, if you can work from home, then maybe you don't need to live in the center of a large city, but can live in a smaller city or in a smaller village and work from home most of the time, and just commute to the office when you have some meetings or something like that, right? Maybe 1 or 2 days per week, and that can allow you to pay less for housing, right? Or for people who are young, like myself, we can have roommates, right? There's no need to live alone. We can have a 2-bedroom apartment and share it with some friends, and that can very meaningfully reduce living costs or the costs you pay for housing. I do that. I'm still living with roommates, so I think it's also much more fun, less isolationist. Okay, so that's about housing. If that doesn't work, you can try to cut your the amount of money you spend on food, right? So the first obvious tip is to reduce spending on restaurants and try to meal prep at home, right? You can cook for a couple of days in advance, either freeze it or just, split it into portions and bring it in your lunchbox to the office and eat it there. That's essentially is the first thing I did when I needed to save, because I was a student in Amsterdam. I had literally no money all the time. And so I needed to teach myself to be super disciplined about the way I prepare my food, right? But also you can cut spending maybe on some more expensive grocery items, maybe limit the amount of meat and replace it with some cheaper plant protein, and stuff like that. There are many, many good recipes out there on YouTube for like budget meals, for recipes for students and stuff like that, which are still healthy and nutritious. So you can look for that for inspiration, right? And then the last thing is transport. For many people, this is a very big life hack, right? So the first thing I will share is that a good way to save on car payments or stuff like that is to buy used cars, right? And I don't mean like super old cars that will fall apart when you start them, right? I mean cars that are 3 to 4 years old. The reason is that if you buy a new car, which many people do because it's just like what you do, right? Or what salespeople tell you to do, is you buy a new car. But maybe some of you heard that when you start using a new car, its value and its price declines very rapidly in the first couple of years, right? It's just like how car prices behave, right? So if you buy a car that is 3 to 4 years old, it's still super reliable. You can still use it for a decade or even slightly more without spending a lot of money on repairs and stuff like that. But you can buy it at a significant discount compared to a new car, many times like a third cheaper or something like that. And that can allow you to have a smaller car payment or spend less money if you buy it from savings or something like that. Again, that can free up like potentially even 100 euros or bigger tens of euros, depending on how expensive your car is, right? So that's one of the life hacks that you can use. Or other people, many households have two cars despite not really needing them. If they did some planning, maybe they could live off one car and even be more eco-friendly, right? Or you can try to minimize individual transport. So this is what my dad did when we started talking about these things a bit. When I started working in Finax and started being more open about these topics. So he just he has like he works in the city that is not like super close to where he lives, and he has to commute by car, and usually he did that alone, right? Like he commuted in his car alone, but then they realized that from the same town there were like two more colleagues, right? So they shared the ride, and they split the gas costs, right? So they always pick each other up and go to work, and he said that it managed to generate like considerable savings on gas. Or if you live in a city and can use a bike, like me, because we have these pink bikes in Bratislava, then you can commute using a bike if that's an option. It's healthy and it's cheaper. I understand that it's not accessible for everyone, but maybe some people are in a situation where they can use bike. I got used in Amsterdam, and it's very addictive. So I do that until now. Okay, once you go through that and there's no more space to optimize expenses, you can always search for reserves in other consumption. And the best way to do that is to just track your spending regularly. Like each week, sit down to write down your expenses and see how much you spent on different categories. And maybe many times you will be surprised on how much you spent, right? Many things will just shock you, and you didn't even realize that over the month it accumulates to such a huge amount, and you will decide yourself that you want to spend less on that category, such as going out or whatever, right? The important question to ask yourself always is, are you spending your income on things that make you happy? Because a lot of our spending today is more a result of fear of missing out, or of just being used to spending a lot, or of clever marketing, or of us comparing ourselves to others, right? We just think that we are expected to have a lot of nice things and a lot of clothes that we don't use, and a big house, a big car, right? But wouldn't you be equally happy with secondhand clothes and stuff like that? Just ask yourself that with each expense category that you have, right? Like, am I just spending on this because I'm afraid of missing out, or is this genuinely bringing happiness to me? Is it a good buy, right? If it does bring happiness to you, then spend on it. If not, try to find a way to reduce those expenses, right? Okay, once you have that plan, it won't be enough to just like create the budget and then hope that it somehow survives. You need to maintain your budget. You need to keep yourself in check and check whether you are fulfilling your plan. And that is, budget management. So what you should do every week, let's say on Saturday, you should sit down and write down your expenses, and to see whether you are on a good way to fulfill your budget, right? So, for example, if it's the 15th day of the month, or let's say half of the month or something like that, and you see that it depends on when you get your paycheck, right? But let's say half of month is gone, and you've spent much more than half of your budget for transport. Then you can try to tighten your belt a bit, right? So try to find ways to spend less on that category until the end of the month. In contrast, if half of the month is gone and you've spent almost nothing on some category, such as fun or some hobby or whatever, then you can reward yourself. Budget is not just like supposed to keep you in a cage. It's also a permission to spend without worries, because you know that you are saving enough and you can spend everything that is there, that is left in your bank account after like saving your money without regret, without feeling guilty about it. And that's also a good way to enjoy life, right? That is why usually when we are talking about saving or investing, it's good to set up some standing orders so that money leaves like 2 days after your paycheck into your savings account and into your investment account, so that you don't even count on it, right? It's like there was a crisis and you got a lower paycheck this month, and you will find a way to survive with the rest, right? But it's good to sort of make the money go away as soon as possible at the beginning of the month, so that you don't even count on it in the first place. Okay, that's what you can do once a week. You need to look for a way to make this a habit, right? If you make this a habit, it will be automatic for you later on in life. So try to find for ways, try to look for ways that make this a habit, right? So, for example, I have a calendar reminder each Saturday, let's say in the afternoon. So when I'm sipping my afternoon coffee, I have a calendar reminder that puts, creates the notification saying like expenses, and I'm like, okay, I need to sit down and check my expenses, right? There are many other ways. Just like try to find a way that works for you. Then once a month, you should check whether you manage to fulfill your budget. You should check whether you manage to save enough money, so those 10 to 20%. And you can also adjust your budget. So if you find that, like chronically, almost all the time, you spend more than allowed on one category, but less than allowed on another category, you can increase the target amount for the category you usually overspend on and decrease the target amount for the category you usually underspend on, right? And then once a year, you should do two things. So this is like a New Year's thing, right? You don't have to do that often, but let's say at the beginning of January, when we still don't have to go to work, or at the end of December or something like that, on the 6th of January, just track changes, note down changes in your wealth and liabilities, right? So check whether the value of your savings went up over the last year, and check whether you managed to sort of pay off some of your debt. Of course, if you buy a house and your debt increases due to taking on a mortgage, that's not a problem. But with all the other loans, you should be seeking to decrease them over time, right? Also, try to adjust your budget to changing life situations. So if there are some major life changes, such as your first kid is being born, or we are planning to buy a house and take on a mortgage, or our kid is leaving for university, there will very likely be expenses associated with this, right? And your expenses will change. So it's good to think ahead, and at the beginning of the year, maybe change your budget and create some reserve for some new expenses, let's say associated with a first child being born, for instance, right? Your budget will change over your life. Okay. Now, everything that I said about budget management, that sounds super boring, right? And tedious. It's not a very pleasant thing to do. I understand. Like, I don't like to put my expenses into an Excel sheet, and I am a person who studied economics, likes numbers, I like math, and I like data analysis and all of that. Still, I find it the most boring task ever. There are many other better ways I can imagine spending my Saturday than tracking my expenses. So, thank God, there are ways to automate this today. So there are applications that allow you to sort of link bank accounts to them, and they will automatically categorize your expenses and also track whether you are spending your budget. They will give you like progress bars in each budget to check how much money you have left in various categories until the end of the month or until the next paycheck. These applications are called personal finance management applications, or PFM applications, and they can be very useful because they save a lot of time and nerves, right? So there are some examples. Revolut has a very good budget widget, so you can create budgets there and sort of follow them. Other applications that work in Slovakia are Spendy or Wallet. Those can be linked with more bank accounts, even with your partners or something like that. And also, we have our own function in the application of Finax. I'm not selling any product here because this comes for free. So you just need to have the Finax app downloaded. And I believe you have to go through the process of registration, like create an account, but you don't have to invest any money with Finax to be able to use this for free. So it's like a free tool. What Coach does is it's essentially a standard personal finance management application, so you can link it with all your bank accounts, even if you have more bank accounts, or if you want to link your partner's and child's bank account to it, you can do that. And it will then automatically categorize your expenses. So it will recognize whether something is a payment for a restaurant or for gasoline or for whatever, and it will put it into a category. If it does it wrong, you can always change the category yourself. And then, of course, you can create and track budget, so you can see it in the screenshot there, right? It will tell you how much money you have left until the end of the month in each budget. And it also allows you to note down changes in your wealth and debt, right? So in your savings, how much debt you still owe and stuff like that, allowing you to do the yearly review in a more user-friendly way, right? The reason we did this is we wanted to provide people with some more objective digital advisory because often, and especially I would say in Central Europe, usually when you wanted some financial advice, you could reach out to financial agents, right? To financial advisors, those classmates from high school. And they could go over your financial situation with you and provide many times solid advice. The problem is that in order to survive, they often needed to intermediate investment products, right? They needed to sell you like a mutual fund or an insurance policy. And many times they cared about, which company or which insurance company or bank offered the biggest commissions rather than what was really objectively good for you. So pushing you into decisions which you didn't necessarily didn't necessarily want to make. With this coach, we sort of wanted to design some digital advisory, help with budget and stuff like that, which wouldn't push you into buying an insurance policy in the meantime, right? So you can use it for free if you want. Okay. One last idea before I move on to emergency fund, and that's like the idea that, personal finance and creating savings, it's not only about cutting expenses, right? Because I talked a lot about like spend less, and how dare you buy coffee, right? And that's a good start. Of course, eliminating expenses that don't make you happy and that you don't need and can survive without. That's a very, very important first step, and you should always do that because you can earn millions and still be broke because you spend on things you don't need, right? But over the long run, so once you optimize your expenses and once you have a modest lifestyle that you are happy with, it's always better to focus on income growth if that's possible, right? Try to increase your income over the long run. The reason is that there's hypothetically no ceiling, and many times, if you don't spend on coffee once, you refuse one coffee, you save like 3-4 euros, right? And that's not much. But if you get an increase in your paycheck, if you get promoted, that can bring you like potentially 100 or even more euros per month, right, in net salary. And that's like eliminating a very, very large expense, right? So oftentimes growing your income is the more convenient and like more effective way to start saving, right? Yeah, that's the €3 coffee versus 30,000 a year in salary question, right? And so the way to do that, right? Because then the question might be like, doesn't that just depend on my boss or the sphere I work with? And that is partially true, but usually you can invest in your most valuable asset, and that's you. It's like your knowledge, it's your skills, it's what you can do, and it's how experienced you are in what you do, right? So I would say many times underappreciated in personal finance and in also literature aspect is that you can actively focus on income growth by like educating yourself and trying to gain more skills and education all the time, right? So that can be anything from formal education. Many times having a good university degree can open doors to sort of a wider variety of jobs so that you can select those that have better conditions or better pay. But also even after school, education never stops, right? So you can get certifications. You can do courses. There are many online tools such as, I don't know, Coursera or Udemy or Skillmea in Slovakia or something like that, where you can just pay relatively modest prices for tutorials that will teach you anything from like accounting tools and design tools to things that you need for project management and tools that you can use for project management, right? So you can gain a lot of useful skills by just doing a simple course like that. In some spheres, there are certifications, right? I'm, for example, currently working on a chartered financial analyst designation, which is like a thing similar to a university degree that you have to pass 3 very difficult exams, but once you do it, you can put it like a title behind your name, and it opens doors to more senior, better paid positions, right? But even if that's not like something directly related to your sphere, also like some general education is good, right? So listening to podcasts, reading books. I know that sounds I know that might sound stupid, like, how will a podcast help me in my career? But I have 2 colleagues who are, okay, this is still like very listening to podcasts and reading books that are related to their job, right? But they are they really like to educate themselves. They read a lot of news. They read hundreds of books related to what they do. They listen to podcasts all the time, which means they are super smart about the sphere we do. And that is why they are capable of creating very good educational content, of coming up with very good ideas on how we could make our products better or improve some processes within our firm. And they are in general like easy to work with, and they understand tasks better. They can bring a lot of inspiration to how things should be run around, right? Ran around. It's essentially like this knowledge and this love of education that got them to their very high managerial positions in Finax, right? So even just like reading books and knowing a lot about your sphere is good because it makes you a better performer and easier to work with in general. And like you will be able to improve things around you at a faster pace. But also, if it's not directly related to your sphere, it's good to also like develop some general skills. So for example, negotiations. In Central Europe, we often don't negotiate our salaries because it's not in the culture much, right? Maybe it's something with like the socialist past, right? Where you couldn't negotiate with your boss because salaries were centrally set. So no one did it here. So no one taught us. So sometimes it's good to just ask and negotiate, right? And there are good books about negotiating a salary or good podcasts about negotiating a salary, right? Or reading books that can, for example, help you invest, put your personal financial situation in order. All those things will help you sort of increase your income over the long run, right? And they are accessible. 3 good books a year don't cost that much. Podcasts come for free on many streaming platforms. So knowledge compared to the past, where it was just accessible at best universities in the world, which costed like a fortune and still cost a fortune. Compared to the past, now knowledge is much more accessible, so it's good to use it. Okay, that's enough about being able to save and setting up a budget and starting to save, right? Once you are able to do that, once you have some reserves, and once you are saving 10 to 20% of your income, the next logical question is what to save for, right? What is the first financial goal? So if you've never saved and invested much before, the only logical first goal on your financial journey is to save up an emergency fund. So emergency fund is an amount of money that you have set aside somewhere that is supposed to cover unexpected situations. What do I mean by this? How can it help you? The very first ones are sort of intuitive, right? Imagine you lose your job and you can't find a new one for a couple of months because there's some economic crisis or something like that. You will be getting unemployment insurance, but that can be much less than you were used to, right? So it might not be enough to cover all the expenses you need to cover. And if that happens, and if that's the case, having an emergency fund can sort of help you survive for a couple of months so that you can search around for a good job, so that you're not forced to accept the first terrible offer with very low pay that you find out, right? So it's a good protection in case of these crisis situations, to provide some supportive income in these times. Also, it's a general insurance against anything that can happen. So a car breaks down, or an appliance at the home breaks down, or the dentist asks for too much money because they needed to do something, right? Or your phone breaks down or anything like that. You can sort of use that money to replace it and then fill in your emergency fund later, right? So it also serves to protect you against these things so that you don't have to accept debt in case you don't have money for replacement of those things. Okay, so these first 2 reasons were intuitive. I think you could come up with them. The next 3 are less intuitive. I think they are like more creative. This one is like super unintuitive. So it's wealth protection. What do I mean by this? In the second lecture about investing, we teach people, how to invest, maybe for longer term goals, to like build wealth in the long run, maybe to secure themselves for retirement and stuff like that. One of the most important things you will hear about investing is that investing is risky, right? So the value of, for example, stocks can go up and down. And the best way to mitigate risk in investing, if the investment is set up properly, is to invest for long periods, right? For a long run. Because crises happen, stock go up and down, but those crises are usually overcome and the growth of the global economy then continues, right? So sometimes when a crisis happens and stocks and stock prices decline, the best thing you can do is to just wait for the recovery. Don't panic, right? So you need to wait for a couple of years, maybe, or for a couple of months until the market recovers. Now, what can happen if you don't have an emergency fund and start investing is that there will be a crisis, you will lose your job, and you will need your money. And because you don't have an emergency fund, you will withdraw from your investment account. However, because there is a crisis, there is a decline, right? And you are forced to sort of withdraw your money when your portfolio is at a loss, and then maybe miss out, you won't be able to fill in that money, put it back into the investment account before the economy recovers and stocks start growing again. So you sort of just lose money and aren't there anymore when the stocks are rising again. It's like if you panicked and sold everything, right? It's simulating bad investment behavior. So the best way to avoid that is to have an emergency fund that will allow you to survive even if a crisis hits you, so that you don't have to touch your long-term investments that are supposed to stay there for many, many years, right? And that is also what an emergency fund does. And that is why before you start investing in stocks, you should have an emergency fund. Another possible reason is protection against some inflationary shocks. So, for example, in 2022, many people, when the war in Ukraine started and there was inflation and rising prices everywhere, many people had to pay a lot for, gas and heating that winter. If utility bills are super high in 1 year, you can pay it from your emergency fund, right? No problem. So also that's another sort of protection that you get there. And the last reason is the most beautiful one. Emergency fund doesn't necessarily only have to be to protect you from bad situations. It can also allow you to use good situations to your benefit, right? So, for example, if you want to switch jobs and find a better one because you're burnt out from the other one, it's much easier to do that decision and to take some time off work to sort of look for something better if you know your family is protected because you have an emergency fund. Same with starting a business, right? It's risky. You can lose money and you can have reduced income for some time, right? And it's much easier to start that business if you have some emergency fund that protects you so that your loved ones won't suffer the consequences of your actions, right? So all these things are great about having an emergency fund. Now, if you are convinced about having an emergency fund, you might ask the second very relevant question, and that is how much to save for emergencies. Usually, when you Google it or read a book, most people will recommend saving between 3 to 6 months of your expenses. So that means you would be able to pay your expenses for 3 to 6 months solely from your emergency fund, even if you had no other income, right? Lost your job, unemployment insurance, everything would go bankrupt. You would be able to survive for 3 to 6 months, right? How much, whether 3 is enough or whether you need 6, that's super individual. There's no universal answer, right? Personal finance is personal. Everyone needs something different to be protected. However, there are certain rules you can follow, right? So, for example, if your job is relatively stable, for example, you work for the state, right? With the state sector, massive rounds of layoffs are not that common, right? Because state is not a company. It's not like we can refuse to buy state's products because we need to pay taxes, right? So compared to private sector, compared to companies, state employees usually face lower risks of losing their jobs. Compared to that, people who work in the private sector, in companies that can be doing bad and can announce layoffs of their employees, or even those who have their own business or are self-employed, they face a higher risk of losing their income, of being fired from their job, right? So people who work in the private sector or sort of have an unstable job, unstable income, should have more closely to the 6 months of expenses. Those who have a very stable job, maybe 3 or 4 months of expenses enough for them. But it also depends on other things, right? So if you have kids and people who depend on you, you should have a larger emergency fund, let's say 6 months of expenses, because, other people are hurt if you lose your job. If you live alone and have no family, have no partner, then 3 months are more likely, 3 months of expenses are more likely sufficient. You don't need that much of an emergency fund. Same goes with loans. So if you have a mortgage, for example, if you have some consumer loans and you need to make loan repayments to avoid bankruptcy, then you probably need a larger emergency fund because you need to continue paying those repayments even if there's something bad going on, right? If you don't have any debt, then you don't need that much of an emergency fund. It can be more like 3 to 4 months, right? If you have a mortgage, have a lot of debt, then 5 to 6 months of expenses is probably more optimal. Okay, once you have that amount saved up, you may be asking where to keep it, right? So should I put this in the bank or what is the way? How do we work with this? I would say that an optimal emergency fund has three parameters, three treats. The first of them is it should be liquid. This is a terribly sounding word, but it just means it should be easy to access. It should be accessible. So if something bad happens, then you need to get your money quickly, right? So it shouldn't be somewhere in a in a gold brick, somewhere in a safe in a different country, because then it won't protect you when you need it. Another thing is you shouldn't risk with it much. Many people mistake, emergency fund for money that is supposed to make you rich quickly. That is a very bad thing to do, right? So what those people then do is like, oh, I have my emergency fund in cryptocurrencies. That's very stupid, because if you take a lot of risk with your emergency fund, then you risk that if something bad happens, an economic crisis happens, the value of your emergency fund will decline rapidly and you won't really have money to protect you, right, anymore. So you shouldn't be taking risky investments with this. This is not money to make you rich. This is money to protect you if something goes wrong, right? However, it's good to at least try to earn some interest on it so that you can beat inflation, or at least somehow match the pace of rising prices. The reason is that if you just keep it in some savings account with 0% interest rate, then over time prices will rise and it won't protect you as much anymore, right? Because the value of the emergency fund will essentially decline over time, right? So to find at least some interest that will maybe match inflation or at least mitigate it is a good thing, right? Luckily enough, compared to a couple of years ago, it is possible to find very low risk products that pay interest in the current times, right? That is because interest rates increased, right? In the year 2020, we had zero interest rates everywhere because that was the central bank's policy. However, central banks increased interest rates. They are currently, central bank rates are currently in the positive territory. That means you are capable of finding some products that pay interest. That can take a couple of forms. You can search around for so-called high-interest savings accounts. Usually not larger banks, but online banks or someone like that will have those savings accounts. You can open a free account there and just transfer the money to a savings account there. It will also be good because the money will be hidden from you, right? You won't be able to spend it on some purchases because it's in a different bank, right? In a high-interest savings account. Another possible product, besides these savings accounts, are so-called money market mutual funds or money market ETFs, right? So money market funds, money market investments are investment funds that invest in, let's say, kinds of investments that replicate or attempt to replicate the central bank rate, right? They usually earn a very similar interest rate, and they have very, very little risk, right? So the value fluctuates a bit, but it's something like almost a straight line up, right? So you can look for those. We also have one of those products in Finax. It's called Smart Deposit. We also have like a transparent account of Dominic Herbati. Maybe some of you know him. He's a tennis player, and he has a transparent account where he has this product. So you can like open that transparent account to see that it's like a straight line up, right? Because the interest, the yield is paid out every day. So that also sort of pays positive interest. So maybe these products, these investments are something that can be suitable for storing your emergency fund, right? And protecting it at least partially or fully from inflation, right? I want to conclude with this slide. You might be asking, many people, especially those who are more sophisticated and wanted to learn a lot about how to be the Wolf of Wall Street in these lectures, ask me at the end of this presentation, like, what was this all for? Like, I expected a sophisticated lecture on how to get rich, on how to invest, on how to be the Wolf of Wall Street, right? Why are we talking about, spending less and increasing your income and creating some savings? Why is that so important? I wanted to show you this table. This table assumes you have a net annual income of 15,000 euros. So that's realistic for many people in our region, right? You have to divide that by 12 to get to the monthly salary, right? And it tells you the total wealth that you would accumulate somewhere in an investment account if you change two things. So as you go from the left to the right, you increase your savings rate, right? So you set aside a bigger percentage of your income, right? You save 5% of your income, 10, 15, and so on, right? So as you go more to the right, you save more. The rows, right? So as you go from the top to the bottom, that is your investment return, right? So it's something like the percentage profit you can earn by investing in stocks, let's say, or something like that, right? So as you go from top to the bottom, you become a better investor, right? You become the better Wolf of Wall Street. As you go from left to the right, you become a better saver. You just spend less and set aside a bigger portion of your income. Notice one very interesting thing. If you start in the top left corner where the 9,000 is, and you move from top to bottom, your final wealth after 30 years, right? The final financial wealth increases significantly. So being a good investor pays off, right? However, let's say you didn't become a better investor, stayed in the top row, and just moved to the right, right? By saving more, by saving 20% rather than 2%. The final result is 90,000. So it's almost 2 times as much as if you saved little and became a better investor. So this is just, a math that illustrates a very simple lesson. Saving comes first. Many times saving more can get you more money than becoming a better sophisticated investor. You can be a very, very good investor, but if you invest very little, if you invest a couple of hundreds per year, you won't get rich probably ever, right? You need to be able to set aside a significant portion of your income to be able to earn significant wealth, right? So in the next lecture, in the next webinar on investing, we teach people how to become good and wise investors, right? But that's of no value if you don't really save money, right? Or of lower value if you don't save a lot of money. So investing always comes first if you want to secure your financial future, if you want to, become rich, because that's why people want to be good investors. So yeah, that's one perhaps rather surprising fact towards the end. Okay, that's all I had prepared for today. You can take a picture of this slide if you want, because this was just a very introductory level thinking, right? I only had an hour and a couple of minutes to go over it. There are people who process these ideas on a deeper level. They wrote books about it. There are more stories. There are better ways to say this. There are more details, right? More inspiration, more tips. So if you want, you can read some of these books. I would, for example, recommend The Psychology of Money. That is on top of there. It's very easy to read, and it contains essentially the investment philosophy that is best for ordinary people, right? But all the others are also good. You can maybe order some of them and educate yourself that way. Of course, we also, on Finax website, we publish blogs, or we have podcasts both in English and in Slovak. So if you are interested, you can go check out other pieces of our content. It comes fully free. We don't charge anything for it. So it's accessible for everyone. And you will find maybe other topics of interest within personal finance there. Okay, that was exhausting. It's almost 10:30. There's one thing I wanted to ask you. If you have any questions, now is the time to ask them, and I can go over them. If you have no questions, then I wanted to kindly ask you if you could fill in our feedback form here. One thing important to note, it comes in 2 language versions. When you scan this, the initial language will very likely be Slovak, but in the top right corner of that form, you can switch into English. So if English is your language, just look in the top right corner and switch Slovak to English. If you speak Slovak, then you can fill it in Slovak, right? It will ask for some feedback. If there's anything you would improve about this presentation, add some questions that weren't answered, you can leave it for us there. We always try to be receptive to feedback. Essentially, half of these topics, just of those 5 lectures that I mentioned, were created because people asked for them. So we try to respond to feedback and make these lectures better by responding to feedback. If you liked it, we will also appreciate any positive feedback, of course. Okay. Besides that feedback form, um, if let me check. Da-da-da. Yeah. Okay. Besides that, I see two questions in Slido. So let's go over them while you are filling in your feedback form. So, budget tracking apps, do they work with accounts from different countries? Um, uh, I would have to. I don't want to overpromise here. The better ones should work with accounts from different countries, especially if those countries are not very far apart. But yeah, the linkage doesn't have to work with all countries, right? So maybe you can try more budget apps and try to find those that sort of work with your banks, because it's not always guaranteed. But with the larger banks or larger bank groups, they should mostly be and broadly be compatible, right? But it's not, yeah, it's not always the case that the linkage works well if you have like if you have banks from very different countries, right? Um, I would maybe, suggest in that case, like Googling around, right? You can just Google what it's called like PFM app or budget tracking app or something like that, like personal finance management app. You can Google what works in your country. I bet that there is a budget tracking app that is compatible with banks from all countries. You just have to search for the right one, right? But you can perhaps like try the coach thingy at first, or Spendy and Wallet that I mentioned. Like they should be compatible with many banks, and you'll see. And if that doesn't work, you can Google it. But that's a good point, right? Oftentimes, like it can happen that banks are not compatible. So that's a fair thing to point out, perhaps. Could you repeat what to put crisis savings into? So should be something that is not very risky. So definitely not stocks or something like that, or cryptocurrencies. Um, Crisis savings. Either try to search for something that is not very risky but pays some interest, right? So those can be several things. I mentioned high interest savings accounts. So those are just savings accounts that pay a lot of interest. Usually you can find them in online banks, such as, Revolut or mBank in Slovakia, I believe, pays higher interest rates. I believe FIO had a very good interest rate in Slovakia and stuff like that. Oftentimes you can just open with them an account online. Many of them don't charge fees for accounts, and they just pay high interest on their savings accounts. So that's option number one. Option number two are so-called money market investment funds. Those are just very safe, either mutual funds or other investment funds that you can invest into, that usually have very, very low risk and replicate the interest rates of central bank. If you want to look for inspiration, there's the smart deposit product that I mentioned. It's like a Finax investment product that works essentially on this principle. Right, it's an example of a money market investment fund that sort of works. But if you don't want to go with that, there are other similar options. Just Google money market investment funds or money market mutual funds, and you will find many other options, and you can compare the fees and stuff like that, right? You don't necessarily have to go with the Finax solution. So these are the things. But in general, try to and also I would say a portion of that emergency fund, portion of that crisis savings, you can also keep it in your main bank in savings account, even if that pays a zero interest. So, for example, I keep like a small part of my emergency savings there. The reason is that sometimes you need money super quickly and can't, transfer from one bank to another. You just need to transfer it in one bank. So that can be, I don't know, when you're somewhere at the airport and for some reason your flight gets canceled or your flight ticket gets invalidated and you need to buy a new one immediately, then it's maybe good to have at least something in the same bank, and the rest can be invested somewhere with an interest. Hey, is If there's anything else, feel free to write it down. If not, then I think everyone must be very, very tired. So I suggest we can stop the recording here.